The wind didn't howl in Blackwood Creek. It whispered. Not a sound you heard with your ears, but something that rattled your teeth, something that felt like it came from inside your skull. People don't disappear in Blackwood Creek, they are absorbed. And if you listen closely, you can still hear them whispering from inside the walls. The wind didn't howl in Blackwood Creek. It whispered. It was a wet, low-frequency vibration that seemed to rattle the teeth more than the ears. Elias Thorne had moved to the isolated cabin to finish his manuscript, seeking the kind of silence that only 100 miles of Oregon pine could provide. But 3 weeks in, he realized the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. It started with the clack. At exactly 3:14 a.m., a sound like 2 river stones being struck together echoed from the crawl space beneath the floorboards. Elias, half asleep, chalked it up to settling wood or a stray raccoon. But the next night, the clack was followed by a wet, sliding sound, as if something heavy and soaked in oil was being dragged across the dirt. He pulled up a floorboard in the pantry the following morning. The earth below was dry, but he found something that made his skin prickle. A circle of small, bleached bones, birds mostly, arranged in a perfect geometric pattern. In the center sat a single human molar. By the second week, a fog rolled in that refused to lift. It was thick, smelling of stagnant water and old pennies. Elias stopped going outside. The trees, usually tall and majestic, now looked like skeletal fingers reaching out of the gray soup. One evening, while brushing his teeth, he looked into the steamed-up bathroom mirror. He wiped a circle clear and froze. In the reflection, the door behind him was open. Standing in the hallway was a figure. It was impossibly tall, its head tilted at a 90-degree angle, resting on its own shoulder. It had no face, only a smooth expanse of pale, translucent skin that rippled as if something were swimming just beneath the surface. Elias spun around. The hallway was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone, but a single word was written in the condensation on the inside of the glass. O-P-E-N. On the 14th night, the temperature plummeted, but the clacking grew frantic. It wasn't coming from the crawl space anymore. It was coming from the walls. Elias sat in the center of the living room, a shotgun across his lap and every lamp blazing. Then the power flickered. In the rhythmic pulses of light, he saw them. They weren't ghosts, they were things, lean, gray, and hairless, their limbs too long for their bodies. They weren't coming through the doors, they were emerging from the shadows themselves, stretching out of the corners like ink being poured into water. One of them leaned over him, its face mere inches from his. He could smell the copper and the rot. It didn't have a mouth, but a slit opened across its chest, and a voice that sounded like grinding glass vibrated through Elias's own chest. "You invited the silence. Now become it." The local sheriff found the cabin a month later. The lights were still on, powered by a humming generator. The manuscript on the desk was 400 pages long, but every single page was blank, save for the very last sheet. On that page, written in a dark, brownish ink that the lab later identified as human blood, was a single, repeating sentence. "The house is not a box, it is a mouth." Elias Thorne was never found. However, the sheriff did note one peculiar detail. The bathroom mirror was missing, and in its place was a hole in the wall that led into a space much larger than the cabin's external dimensions should have allowed. And from that darkness, he could hear the faint rhythmic clack of stones. The sheriff, a man named Miller who had seen 20 years of hunting accidents and bar fights, didn't believe in ghosts, but as he stood before the jagged hole where the bathroom mirror had been, his flashlight beam didn't hit a wall. It kept going, swallowed by a space that defied the cabin's external dimensions. Against every instinct of his training, Miller climbed through. The air inside didn't smell like a house. It smelled of damp earth and ozone, chilled to a temperature that turned his breath into ragged plumes of frost. As Miller stepped forward, his boots didn't click on wood. They sank into something soft and fibrous. He shined his light down. The floor was a carpet of tightly woven hair, black, gray, and blonde, matted together with a translucent resin. He wasn't inside a room, he was inside a conduit. The unwalls were curved and ribbed like a massive rib cage, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic thrum. Every few feet, Elias Thorne's belongings were embedded in the organic walls like fossils in amber. A gold watch still ticking, a single leather loafer, the fountain pen Elias had used for his manuscript leaking ink that looked like a spreading bruise against the pale lining. "Thorne!" Miller's voice didn't echo. It was flat, instantly absorbed by the walls. A sound responded. Clack, clack. Miller rounded a bend in the fleshy tunnel, and his light hit a chamber that opened up like a cathedral of bone. In the center, suspended by thin, silvery filaments, was Elias. He was alive, but he was no longer singular. His skin had been fused with the walls, his limbs stretched thin like pulled taffy to meet the edges of the room. His eyes were open, but the pupils had bled into the whites, turning his gaze into two solid orbs of obsidian. "Sheriff," Elias whispered. The sound didn't come from his mouth, which was sewn shut with the same dark hair that lined the floor, but from the slits in the walls. "You shouldn't have brought the light. It hurts the digestion." Miller backed away, reaching for his sidearm, but his holster was empty. In its place, a growth of that pale, rippling skin had already begun to weave over his belt. The clacking intensified. It wasn't stones, it was the sound of thousands of tiny calcified teeth hidden behind the ribbed walls, snapping in anticipation. The house wasn't just a mouth, it was a gastric system. It took the lonely, the silent, and the forgotten, and it turned their consciousness into the whispering wind that haunted the creek. "It's not so bad," Elias's voice vibrated through Miller's own skull. "Once you stop trying to be a person and start being a part of the house." When the backup deputies arrived 2 hours later, the cabin was gone. Not burned down, not collapsed, simply gone. There was only a rectangular patch of dirt where the foundation should have been. No tire tracks, no debris, and no footprints leading away. The only thing left behind was Miller's sheriff's badge pinned to the center of the dirt patch. As the deputies stood in the clearing, the wind began to pick up. It didn't howl, it whispered. And if they had listened closely, they would have heard a new voice joined with the old ones, a low, gravelly tone that sounded suspiciously like a man who used to believe in nothing he couldn't see. 5 years after Sheriff Miller vanished, the cabin reappeared, not in the woods of Oregon, but nestled in the rusted industrial skeleton of an abandoned shipyard in New Jersey. To the Void Walkers, a group of 3 urban explorers with a combined social media following of 2 million, it was the ultimate holy grail. "Check the levels," Jax whispered, adjusting his GoPro. The cabin sat incongruously on the cracked concrete of a dry dock. It looked pristine, out of place against the salt-eroded cranes and rotting steel. Sarah, the group's tech lead, frowned at her handheld monitor. "Radiation is 0, but the EMF is off the charts. It's pulsing, Jax, like a heartbeat." The front door wasn't locked. It wasn't even latched. As Leo, the youngest of the group, pushed it open, the smell hit them. Not rot, but the overwhelming scent of freshly cut pine and ozone. "The interior is wrong," Leo muttered, his camera light sweeping the living room. "The windows show the Oregon forest. Look." He was right. Through the dust-streaked glass, they saw the dark, rain-soaked pines of the Pacific Northwest. But when they looked through the open front door, they saw the rusted cranes of the New Jersey shipyard. The cabin was a bridge between 2 places, anchored by something unseen. They found the bathroom quickly. The hole in the bathroom was still there, but it had grown. It now resembled a jagged, obsidian-rimmed portal. "Guys," Sarah gasped, pointing her thermal camera at the opening. "The temperature